So they know that they're from Israel. They call their sons Ephraim, Menashe, Shemuel, Emmanuel, and they know they're from Israel. And the pastors also say they're from Israel.
Shalom. Today we're going to speak about the Ark, Noah's Ark. You remember that big boat that he built in order to save himself, his family, and all these animals from the flood? Well, when you read that story literally, it doesn't make sense. There are lots of inconsistencies. First of all, it's very hard to believe that you can fit in a 150-meter long boat tens of thousands of species of animals, or at least not the way we tend to imagine it. So let's take a better look into these scriptures and try to see what was really written. Because I tell you what, if we just stay with that image of a man 4,000 years ago in a boat with elephants and lions and animals in it, it just makes it a great story, but not more. And somehow it brings down the Torah to a book we don't need today. You know, the Greeks also have mythology. So the Torah is no mythology. It's not made out of stories that we don't need to understand, that we don't care of today. It's made of stories that are very, very important for us to understand today. So let's take again a better look at what's written and see what was really written about that story, about that great story of Noah's Ark. And one of the first things that should attract our attention when we read that passage is the fact that when God says, Emche et Adam, I will erase mankind, or the man, he says from Adam to the mammals, to the crawling ones, and all the way to the birds of the skies, as if these animals were in fact included into mankind. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about people? Are we talking about animals? Now, when we investigate a little deeper in this passage, we see that there are a few words that are being repeated only once in the Torah later on in order to shed light in that passage. So you have first of all the word hayekum, which is the existence, which in the passage of Noah describes the animals and the man being erased in that flood. But later on only describes people, and the people that died along with Datan and Aviram when the earth swallowed them. Then you have the word להחיות, which means resuscitate, which in the story of Noah only describes the animals that should be resuscitated along with Noah. But later on in Egypt, in the story of Joseph and his brothers, Joseph says, don't worry, God planned all that in order to resuscitate a great people. So you see, words that describe on one side animals and people, later on are being used only to describe people and not animals. So this starts to bring my attention on the fact that maybe in the ark it was not animals the way I think, the way we tend to imagine, but maybe it was people. Now, why give to people names of animals? Well, in the Torah, it happens. You see that Yehuda is called a young lion, Issachar is called a donkey, Dan is called a snake, you have Naphtali that is a dove, and Pharaoh later on that is called also a great crocodile. So again, in that language, people can be compared to animals for various reasons. And there are many other words of this kind who only talk about animals in the story of Noah, but then are being repeated later on to describe only people. We won't go through all of them because there are too many. Just let me give you that example of kol basar, which describes all the flesh of the animals in the time of Noah, and then describes the nations, the goyim. For kol basar in Hebrew, all flesh, can also describe or indicate the races of people, different races of people. Now it makes sense to me that the most important thing to save in a situation like it was in the time of Noah would be the races of mankind before the races of animals. So it makes sense, but we're not there yet. Now the oral Torah also goes towards that direction, that in fact in the ark it was no animals the way we believe, but it was human beings. So just to give you an example, when Rashi talks about the raven, when Noah sends that raven to check if the earth got dry, he writes that the raven was spinning around the ark because he didn't trust Noah, and he was suspecting him to go mate with his wife, with his female. So if it was a real raven, it would not be possible for Noah to do so. So all these little things again reinforce our suspicions towards the fact that in the ark it was not animals the way we are supposed to understand when we read it literally, but it was more human beings, people. Now, in order to understand that connection there is in the Torah between the nations, the goyim, and the animals, or the life forms, we have to go back to the beginning, to the creation, where both mankind and the animals were created. Now, in order to do so, we're going to have to dive deep into the Torah, because these texts are very hermetic, very hard to penetrate, very dense. So before to do so, I just want to bring one point ahead, is the fact that when we read the Torah in the beginning, the creation, we don't see any nations over there. We don't see any people. If it is Adam and Hava and the snake and Cain and Abel. Now, when Cain is about to be expelled, he says, whoever is going to find me is going to kill me. So who is talking about? So here, the Torah starts to shed light on the fact that there are people around. There are people living besides this group of people that we know, Adam and Hava and his children. So this is an important fact, because now we're going to go deep into the Torah. We're going to take some deep breath, take some oxygen, and go down, and we're going to see that in fact there is a very strong connection in the Torah between the nations and what we call the animals. Now pay attention. When God tells Adam or mankind to fructify, multiply, and fill up the earth or the country, because Eretz in Hebrew also stands for country, he then tells them to dominate the animals or to go down into the animals, because Redo in Hebrew also stands for going down. Like later on, God will tell Gitan, go down into the Midianites and the Amalek's camps. Now, when we take a look at these animals, we see that they are divided into 4 groups. You have the Gatayam, the fishes of the sea, Of Hashamayim, the birds of the skies, Ahaya, which is the mammals or everything that goes on 4 legs, and usually the wild animals, and then Aremes, which is everything which crawls. Now when we take a look into the Torah, we see that the animals are always divided into these 4 groups. And not only that, but that each one of these groups has its own environment. The fishes live into the waters, salty waters or sweet waters. The birds live into the mountains. The mammals live into the fields or the valleys. And the crawling ones live in the desert. Now, just as God tells Adam to go down into these animals, so can we also go down into the very words that define these animals. 4 groups of animals, 4 words. Daga, fish. Of, bird. Haya, mammals. Remes, the crawling ones. Now when we focus into these words and we go down then into these words, in that exact order, we see that the word goim is coming up. And goim means, of course, the nations. Now we see that the goim, the nations, are indeed compared or very much connected to the animals. Now, before to explain this and explain that it is not degrading and not insulting for the goim, at the contrary, we're going to have to prove that fact. Now, in the Torah, we need at least 2 witnesses in order to prove a fact. So let me give you 2 examples that are going to show you that in fact the nations themselves in the Torah are also divided into 4 groups of people, and that each one of these groups has its own specific environment. The first example is about all these people that are coming out from the ark, and you see that they are divided into 4 groups of people, and each one linked to a specific environment. You have Yefet, which is linked to the islands. You have Ham, which is linked to the cities. And the cities in the Torah are always in the valleys or in the fields. It represents the space where there is everything you need. Then you have Canaan, which is linked to the desert. And then you have Shem, which is linked to the mountains. So here, right up in the Torah, when it is written that all these people that came out from the ark, even if it took time, you will see that they are themselves divided into those 4 groups with this 4 environment, just like the animals are. This is one example. Now you have the second example. Is when the people of Israel sends spies in order to check the land of Canaan before to enter it. And then you have these people, that the spies that report to the people, and they say, oh, we saw the sons of Anak in Hebron, which is a city. And then they keep on talking about the cities, that they have big fortified cities. So here's one kind. Then they say, we have the Riti, the Yevusi, and the Emori, which live into the mountains. Then you have Amalek, which lives into the Negev, which is a desert. And then you have Canaan, which lives on the Jordan River and on the shore, on the seashore. So here again, 4 types of people, 4 environments, just like the animals. Now the word for animals in Hebrew is hayot, which means the living ones. Now, before to go on, I just want to make a point in order for people not to get the wrong impression about the teachings of the Torah, because there is nothing insulting nor degrading by comparing the nations to the animals in the Torah. At the contrary, you're going to see later on how the Torah is in fact teaching us the differences that there are in mankind in order for men to be able to live in harmony and not to compete with each other, but to complete each other. Now, just as you have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, you have people in this world that are more focused in having a good life and other on growing and understanding things and growing up in spirituality and not in materialism. If all you care about is building a family, building a house, protecting your house, drinking, eating, sleeping, having fun, so you can be compared to animals, because this is the way of life that the animals have. We humans have a writing system. We have a language that is made in order for us to grow, to evolve. Now, people that go into that direction, that invest themselves in life in order to understand things and grow, are called human beings in the Torah, while the others are called animals. But you'll see later on that in fact mankind need both. We need people taking care of materialism, and we need people taking care of spirituality. Now we know that the nations are indeed being compared to animals in the Torah, and that many times in the Torah, when you read about animals, in fact you read about people. Now, in order to conclude that fact, we have to go back to the creation and follow the logic. Because if God tells Adam to go down and dominate these 4 kinds of animals or nations, that means that Adam himself does not belong to any of these groups of animals or nations. And that then Adam does in fact belong to a 5th group of animals or nations. Now, when we analyze the creation and we see the animals that are being created there, we see that in fact there is one animal that does not belong to any other groups of animals, because it regroups in itself all the characteristics of all the other animals. This animal is the crocodile. Why? Because the crocodile can evolve into waters like the fishes. It can go on 4 legs like the mammals. It can crawl like the crawling animals. And just like the birds, it does make eggs and reproduce on the earth. Now, the crocodile is known to be one of the oldest species on earth. Some people say it's a dinosaur, that it survived the extinction of the dinosaurs. Indeed, in the Torah, it is the first animal being created. And in fact, through the word Hagedolim, which means the great ones, the great crocodiles, which is only repeated twice in the creation in order to describe the 2 lights into the skies, the sun and the moon, and the crocodiles, we know that in fact God did create 2 crocodiles. just he did create the two great lights in the skies, the two great stars, he did create two great crocodiles. Now, in the world, you have also two types of crocodiles. You have the crocodiles that evolve into salt waters and the others that evolve into fresh water. Now to go back to a human level, there is in the world also a great people that is composed of two great families and that do not belong to the nations, but that do regroup within them all the characteristics of all the nations. For they are evolved into all the nations' environments and all the countries and all the spaces in the world where the nations do live. These great people is the people of Israel. And these two families are the ones that never assimilated themselves to the nations while living among the nations, while traveling over the place. And these two families of people are the Jews and the Gypsies. Now next time we're gonna see that if all these animals in the ark are actually people, so who are these pure animals and not pure animals that are being offered to God by Noah? And most importantly, how come it took so long to drown mankind?